Now, what is the relevance of this formal schema when we turn to what are called the human sciences? One of them perhaps occupies a privileged place, ethnology. Now, what is ethnology? Ethnology basically means a study of multiple culture in terms of their differences and in terms of their respective comparisons. So when we talk about study of multiple cultures, study of multiple ethnicities, then that particular academic discipline of studying multiple culture is called ethnology. It's called ethnology. So what is ethnology? Ethnology is the academic field or academic discipline of studying multiple cultures. But there is another thing that Derrida has used. One can in fact assume that ethnology could have been born as a science only at a moment when a decentering had come about. At the moment when European culture, I'll come back to this, at the moment when European culture and in consequence the history of metaphysics and of its concepts has been dislocated. This is a very, very important Derridian word, dislocation. Because this concept of dislocation is very much implicated in Derridian deconstruction. Now, had been dislocated, driven from its locus, and forced to stop considering itself as the culture of reference. Now, this is what is called ethnocentrism. Now, there is a difference between ethnology and ethnocentrism. Now, students first must understand the difference between ethnocentrism and ethnology. Now, what is ethnology? Ethnology, as I have already explained, and I'm repeating, that it's just academic research, academic study into multiple ethnicities, into multiple cultures. That's ethnology is all about. Now, what is ethnocentrism? Ethnocentrism is the study. Ethnocentrism is the study of multiple cultures where one standard culture becomes the frame of reference. Now, this is really, really interesting. Ethnocentrism is not ethnology. Ethnocentrism is the study of multiple cultures, is the study of multiple ethnicities, where a particular standard culture becomes the frame of cultural reference and frame of ethnic reference. That is to say, you have to, if you are ethnocentric philosopher, if you are ethnocentric, not ethnological, but ethnocentric philosopher, if you are ethnocentric philosopher, then what do you basically do? You try to analyze other cultures, particularly from the standpoint of your own culture or of a particular culture. Then that particular standard culture, becomes the frame of ethnic reference. That is to say, if I have to analyze African culture, then I have to analyze African culture in the context of Africa and in terms of differences with say other cultures. But if we talk about African culture only in terms of how it is different from British culture, if I explain the Latin American culture in terms of how it is different from British culture, if I talk about Indian culture in terms of how it is different from British culture, if I talk about Chinese culture in terms of how it is different uh, from from British culture, if I talk about say Australian culture, native Aboriginal Australian culture, in terms of how it is different from British culture, then that is not ethnological reference. Then that is ethnocentric reference. Because I am somehow, for bizarre reasons, standardizing British culture as the only acceptable cultural frame of reference. That is ethnocentrism for you. And Derrida, what does Jacques Derrida do? Jacques Derrida basically critiques. Jacques Derrida basically critiques the ethnocentrism. And what does Jacques Derrida celebrate? Jacques Derrida celebrates basically ethnological study or ethnological research. Now, now, what is the relationship between ethnology and post-structuralism? The relationship between ethnology and post-structuralism is that both believes in the absence of center, right? Both believes in the absence of center. Now, when we talk about ethnology, we explain all cultures, but there would be no central culture. There would be no central ethnic or cultural frame of reference. But when you talk about ethnocentrism, ethnocentrism uh, must have a central, dominant, imperial, almost colonial ethnic frame of reference. So that therefore British culture then becomes that frame of ethnic reference against which or by which the rest of the cultures are to be assessed, analyzed, and sometimes adjudicated. Now, now, next, I will move into into the theory of Brycoleur, something that Derrida has talked about in detail with regard to a very famous essay uh, by I think Claude Levi-Strauss, and name of the essay name of the essay is The Savage Mind. The name of the essay is Savage Mind. Yes, and what now before I talk about why Derrida has referred to Claude Levi-Strauss's essay on the savage mind, I have to tell my students what this essay is about. What this essay is about. That is to say, what is the theme, what is the idea, what is the content of this essay. Now, Claude Levi-Strauss has developed a very interesting terminology, jargon, uh, while while talking about the difference between primitive culture and modern culture. And what is that terminology that Claude Levi-Strauss has used in The Savage Mind? And what is the terminology that Claude Levi-Strauss has used uh, to explain the difference between the savage people of the primitive ancient history and the modern man of the 20th and 21st century? The term that Claude Levi-Strauss has used in his essay, The Savage Mind, is this is the term, Brycoleur, right? Brycoleur. Now, what is Brycolia? What is Brycolia? Now,
স্যার আপনার স্পিকারটা অন করুন, মাইকটা অন করুন। হ্যালো, আপনার স্পিকারটা অন করুন, মাইকটা অন করুন।
Am I back?
ইয়েস স্যার।
Okay, right. So I was talking about Derrida has used a particular essay called The Savage Mind. It was written by Claude Levi-Strauss, and in this essay, Claude Levi-Strauss has used extraordinarily interesting term called Brycoleur in terms of showing the difference between the primitive culture and the modern culture. Now, let's talk about Derrida later. Meanwhile, let's understand Claude Levi-Strauss and his essay, because Derrida has used 2-3 pages in this essay to explain Claude Levi-Strauss' essay, The Savage Mind, and why Claude Levi-Strauss has used the word Brycolia in that essay, and why Derrida likes Levi-Strauss's use of Brycolia in his deconstructionist, post-structuralist practices. Now, yes, the term is Brycolia. Now, what is Brycolia? Brycolia, according to Levi-Strauss, according to Claude Levi-Strauss, wow, there is a good news for you. I have been informed
টাটা।
by
sir.
the Zoom authority that uh, I can continue for unlimited hours. Which basically means that Zoom is not going to interrupt my lecture on Derrida. I love you, Zoom. And let's zoom in on Derrida now. And in fact, I am loving Zoom so much that I might start using Zoom from all next lecture onwards. So, so, so now the point that I am interested is the word Bricoleur. Now, what is Bricoleur? Bricoleur means exactly what we do not mean by engineer. Am I audible to the students? Just checking.
Yes, sir.
Right, right. So what is Brycoleur? Brycoleur means someone who is not an engineer. So Brycoleur is the primitive man, is the primitive artist who didn't have technology, but who used science system less arbitrarily. Now, what does that mean? Less arbitrarily. It means that Brycoleur, when refers to a tree, I would request my students to listen to this lecture, this part of the lecture, extremely carefully. Otherwise, you would not understand Brycolia. Otherwise, you would not understand Claude Levi-Strauss, The Savage Mind. Otherwise, you would not understand why Jacques Derrida has referred to Levi-Strauss's essay Savage Mind and Levi-Strauss's theorization of Brycolia in The Savage Mind, and how we can use uh, Strauss's theory of Savage Mind and Brycolia in post-structuralist reading of Jacques Derrida. Now, to go back to Brycolia, what Claude Levi-Strauss is saying is that primitive man used science system less arbitrarily. How? Suppose, let's understand this analysis of Claude Levi-Strauss with a very simple example. Suppose we are primitive man. Suppose we are primitive man. Suppose you are a primitive man, I am a primitive man, we all are primitive man. And we are using language. And in my language, or should I say in our language, we are using tree, for example. Suppose I am wanting to explain you a tree. I want to explain you a tree, so I have to talk about a tree. So when I would talk about a tree, what do I do? Either I will write tree, TRE, or say gach or something like that, but these are not the signs. Remember, the title of the essay is Structure, Sign and Play. And in this part of the discussion, we are basically talking about the deconstruction of sign as a system of linguistics. Now, suppose I have to use the word tree. How do I use the word tree? As a primitive man, not necessarily as a modern man. How do I explain a tree? I would explain a tree by way of maybe writing or painting the image of a tree. I would draw the diagram of a tree or the diagram of a leaf or diagram of jungle or woods. So in that regard, all these diagrams, are directly connected with the point that we wish to refer to. That basically means that there is less arbitrariness between the signifier and the signified. There is less arbitrariness in terms of the sign system and signification. There is less
স্যার
arbitrariness. Yes.
আপনি কি এখানে তাহলে ফার্দিনান্দি শ্বশুরের কথা বলতে চাইছেন?
Yes, yes.
মানে সাইন এন্ড
Yes,
সিগনিফাই।
yes. What exactly? What Derrida is doing while theorizing Claude Lévi-Strauss's essay, "The Savage Mind," and an extraordinarily interesting word that Strauss has used in his Savage Mind called Brycoleur, is because Derrida is deconstructing Ferdinand de Saussure. You're correct. Derrida is deconstructing the structuralist linguistics of Ferdinand de Saussure's structuralist linguistics, the structuralist science system. But there is something outstandingly deconstructionist thing is happening here, because Strauss, I will come back to Derrida as soon as I finish up explaining Claude Lévi-Strauss's essay Savage Mind and the use of the word Brycoleur in that essay, The Savage Mind. Now, in that essay, Claude Lévi-Strauss is saying that there is less arbitrariness. I'll repeat it. There is less arbitrariness between the signifier and the signified for primitive man. When primitive man and used to talk about moon, they would paint moon, or they would do something that would directly implies moon. So for modern man, if I say moon, I would use the word M-O-O-N. Yes, yes, exactly. I would say the word, if I talk about sun, I would write the word S-S-U-N, sun. Now, when I use M-O-O-N, can I ask you a question, simple question, that what is the relationship between M-O-O-N and the thing that comes to the sky at night? Which means the thing that comes at night in the sky and M-O-O-N, and the relationship between M-O-O-N and the thing up in the sky at night is arbitrary. That is to say, there is no motivation behind connections of the signifier and the signifier. So therefore, Strauss is absolutely correct in The Savage Mind while saying that, and Derrida has continuously mentioned this this part of Strauss's essay, The Savage Mind. So the primitive man, the savage man, and the language or the sign system of the primitive savage man was less arbitrary. I'll say it again for the students. The sign system of primitive savage man of ancient history used to be less arbitrary than the sign system of modern man like you and me. Than the sign system of modern men like you and me. Or in other words, the sign system of modern man is far more arbitrary, far more unmotivational. That's the word that we can use. That is far more unmotivational. The sign system of modern man is far more unmotivated, or far more arbitrary and unmotivated than the primitive man. Therefore, the primitive man was artist, according to Claude Lévi-Strauss, and modern man is engineer. This is where Claude Lévi-Strauss is coming very close to Jacques Derrida. And this is why Derrida has referred back to Claude Lévi-Strauss's essay, The Savage Mind, and the use of word Brycoleur in the essay. Let's leave Brycoleur apart. I'll come back to Brycoleur, don't worry. But before I come back to, or should I come to the deconstruction of Brycoleur, let's understand this very carefully. Let's understand this very, very, very carefully. That primitive man sign system was less arbitrary and more motivated, whereas modern man sign system is far more arbitrary and more unmotivated. Now, therefore, Lévi-Strauss felt that primitive man was an artist. This is why Lévi-Strauss felt that primitive man was an artist. And primitive sign system is a part of mythology, folklore, and legend. Whereas modern man's far more arbitrary sign system becomes the discourse of engineer. Becomes the discourse of engineer. And therefore, modern man is not a bricolier. Finally, we have come down to the theory of Brycoleur and Derrida's love for Brycoleur. So, who is Brycoleur? Brycoleur is an artist. Who is Brycoleur? Brycoleur is an amateur. Even the word amateur is theoretically related to Claude Lévi-Strauss's deconstruction of Bricoleur. Why? Because Bricoleur is an artist and therefore unprofessional, whereas engineer is a professional and therefore not a amateur. Now, who is amateur? Amateur, the word is actually has come from a French word called amatore. The word amateur has come from a French root called amateur. Now, amateur the word has come from the French word amour. Amour means in English love, which has come from the Greek god Amoreti. That means the children of love. So, amateur, we often say, oh, he cannot teach. He is new to the profession, he is new to college, so he cannot teach. I have been teaching for 15 years and he has joined just few months ago. So he cannot teach. Why? Because he has not learned professionalism, because he is still amateur in his profession. But interestingly, amateur in the modern science system is a negative word. But once deconstructed, once taken to my favorite word of Jacques Derrida, aporia, it becomes empowering. Something that I have been doing recently with a book, because I'm writing a review for my PhD, review of this author. I hope it's visible. I don't know whether it's visible or not. This is the so amateur means someone who is amateur. Amateur means someone who is from amour, from love. So anyone who does the work out of love, not as a profession, is amateur. So a bricolier is an artist who is unprofessional because he does stuff out of love, and who is an artist who depends on myths and legends and folklorish tales to pursue his love for art. So all your friends who are pursuing science, who are pursuing engineering, who are pursuing medical science, who are pursuing those better professions, they are may not be amateur, they are may not be Brycoleur, but they are professional. And you guys, you may not be as professional as a doctor, you may not be as professional as a as a as an engineer, but you guys are artists. You guys are amateur in the sense of being unprofessional, because you guys are amatore, because you guys are celebrating myths and legends and arts. And what is art? Art means when you talk about moon, you paint moon, you sculpt moon out of love as an art. This is the primitive man, or what's the title of the essay? The savage man. So therefore, savage man celebrates the unprofessionalism, or should I say, savage man deconstructs the unprofessionalism of Brycoleur as an artist. Claude Lévi-Strauss says the savage man basically deconstructs the savage man as a Brycoleur, as an artist, as an amateur, as an amatore who does things out of love, art, and myth, not out of profession, money, and cold epistemology. Because amateur or Bricoleur may not have the center of episteme, may not have the ethnocentrism, right? That's the word I was looking for, but does have mythology, does have folklore, does have legend, does have love, does have art, and more importantly, does have ethnology rather than ethnocentrism. So Brycoleur is more ethnological, more anti-epistemological, more of an artist, more motivated, and less arbitrary the science system is likely to be. Whereas the scientist or the engineer is likely to be more professional, less amateurish, more commercial, less impacted by love, and what is the more important word? Does not believe in myth and love, believes in science, believes in logic, does not believe in magic, believes in logic, believes in grammar, believes in language as a science system which is arbitrary and unmotivated. Now this is the reason. Now obviously students can understand this is exactly the reason why Jacques Derrida in his essay Structure, Sign and Play, while deconstructing language as a science system of Saussurean linguistics, while deconstructing Ferdinand de Saussure's stable structuralist science system, almost ethnocentric science system, has almost explained Derrida's love for Bricoleur in Claude Levi-Strauss essay, the Savage Mind. I would end the lecture here, but if you have any question, then I can open the forum for questions, because you can have plenty of questions, plenty of queries. You can also email me. You can also write me personally in my email ID. You can also WhatsApp me. And if you have any question, you can ask me in this forum also. I'll wait for a few more minutes in case if you have any question.
স্যার, আজাজ এই সাইডের ওরিয়েন্টালিজমের সঙ্গে ফুকোর কি কোনো কানেকশন আছে?
Yes, 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 yes. There is. Because the way Said has talked about Orientalism, and Said has talked about Orientalism almost as a monolithic singular term, because Latin America as a Orient is different from India as a Orient, or Africa as a Orient is different from Australia as a Orient, or China as a Orient, or Russia as a Orient, or Red Indian of North America as Orient, or Canada as Orient. So, what Said has done, Said has created a grand narrative of Orientalism. And once we talk about Foucauldian discourse analysis, once we talk about Derridian deconstructionist praxis, then Orientalism does not remain a grand narrative like Edward Said's Orientalism. It becomes Orientalisms, because you know how much deconstruction, how much Derridian and Foucauldian practices celebrate pluralities rather than singularities of monolithic grand narrative. Because modernists and the structuralists, they believed in grand narratives and the stability and the ethnocentrism of the grand narratives, whereas the Foucauldian, Derridian deconstructionist practices, they believed in the pluralities of ethnologies rather than stability of ethnocentrism. Have I answered you, Akash?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes. Do we have any other question? Okay. You feel free to email me or WhatsApp me if you have any query regarding the differences between ethnology and ethnocentrism, regarding the differences between Brycoleur and or amatore and engineering, or regarding Derrida's reference of Claude Levi-Strauss's The Savage Mind. In fact, in my next lecture in college, I would start my lecture exactly where I have ended. That is, I will start my lecture not on why Claude Levi-Strauss has used Brycoleur in The Savage Mind, but on why and how Derrida has referred to Claude Levi-Strauss's use of Bricoleur as someone who is not an engineer in The Savage Mind, and why uh, Derrida himself becomes a Bricoleur while referring to it, and Derrida's deconstructionist critical practices becomes a bricolage, a post-structuralist being a bricolier himself. Thank you.